Suzy Parker, October 28, 1932 to May 3, 2003, was an American model and actress active from 1947 into the early 1960s. Her modeling career reached its zenith during the 1950s, when she appeared on the cover of dozens of magazines and in advertisements and movie and television roles. She appeared in several Revlon advertisements as well as in advertisements for many other cosmetic companies, including Solo Products, the largest hair care product company in the country at the time. Models did not have exclusive cosmetic company contracts until Lauren Hutton and Karen Graham in the early 1970s. She was the first model to earn $100,000 per year and the only fashion model to have a Beatles song named after her, albeit an unreleased one. Early life. Suzy Parker was born Cecilia and Renee Parker in Long Island City, New York, to George, 1895 to 1958, and Elizabeth Parker, 1897 to 1965, who married in 1916. She had three older sisters: Dorian, 1917 to 2008, Florian, 1918 to 2010, and Georgiabelle, 1921 to 1988. Elizabeth believed she was undergoing menopause, but then discovered she was several months pregnant with Cecilia/Suzy. Suzy's original names came from three of her mother's best friends. A then-teenage Dorian advised her mother to arrange the names in the order Cecilia, Renee, and Parker, so the initials of the names would spell the word crap. Dorian claimed her mother had no idea what it meant. Parker's father, George, disliked the name Cecilia and called her Suzy, a name which Parker would retain throughout her life. A French Vogue photographer later changed the spelling to Suzy. Parker's family later moved to Highland Park, New Jersey, and then to Florida. When Parker was 15, sister Dorian, herself one of the top models of the era, introduced her to Eileen Ford. Career. Parker and two of her sisters were tall, all measuring between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 1 inch. Sister Dorian, who modeled under the name Dorian Lee, was the sole exception, standing 5 feet 5 inches. In 1944, Dorian worked as an advertising copywriter when a coworker encouraged her to go to the Conover modeling agency. Dorian was one of the top models in the world, arguably referred to as the world's first supermodel, along with Lisa Fonsagraves. When Parker was about age 15, Dorian telephoned Ford Modeling Agency and told Eileen and Jerry Ford that she would sign on with them if they also took her younger sister. Sight unseen. Eager to represent Dorian, they agreed, expecting to meet a similarly petite, extremely thin, flawless, pale-faced, electric blue-eyed, raven-haired younger version of Dorian. They were shocked to meet Suzy for the first time. Parker was already 5 feet 10 inches, big-boned, and had carrot red hair, pale green eyes, and freckles. She would become more famous than Dorian. Suzy Parker's photo appeared in Life magazine when she was 15. That same year, one of her first magazine advertisements was for DeRosa Jewelry. Although she still lived with her parents in Florida, she stayed in New York City with Dorian when she had modeling assignments there. Dorian introduced Parker to her fashion photographer friends, Irving Penn, Horst P. Horst, John Rawlings, and a young Richard Avedon. Parker became Avedon's muse. She said years later that, "The only joy I ever got out of modeling was working with Dick Avedon." She became the so-called signature face of the Coco Chanel brand. Chanel herself became a close confidant, giving Parker advice on men and money as well as creating numerous Chanel outfits for her. She was the first model to earn $200 per hour and $100,000 per year. Vogue declared her one of the faces of the confident post-war American woman. By 1955, she owed income taxes on her modeling income from previous years, amounting to more than $60,000 in back taxes and rapidly accumulating penalties, an enormous amount at the time. Jerry Ford paid her tax bill and found her assignments. She worked also non-stop for Vogue, Revlon, Hertz, Westinghouse, Max Factor, Bliss, DuPont, Simplicity, Smirnoff, and Ronson Shavers, to name a few. She also was on the covers of about 70 magazines around the world, including Vogue, Elle, Life, Look, Redbook, Paris Match, and McCall's. After being introduced to and taught photography by war photographer Robert Capa, Parker was briefly listed as a member of Magnum Photos. Her first film role was in Kiss Them For Me, 1957, playing the main interest of Cary Grant's character. Soon after, she accepted a cameo role in Funny Face, 1957, on screen for 2 minutes in a musical number described as Pink Number. Her other films include 10 North Frederick, 1958, The Best of Everything, 1959, A Circle of Deception, 1960, during which she met future husband Bradford Dillman, Flight from Ashia, 1964, Chamber of Horrors, 1966, and dramatic roles in TV shows such as Burke's Law and The Twilight Zone, plus appearances as herself on a number of quiz shows such as I've Got a Secret. After marrying her third husband, actor Bradford Dillman, in 1963, and suffering injuries in a car accident in 1964, she mostly retired from modeling and acting. Relationships and children. Parker was married 3 times. In 1950, she and high school sweetheart, Ronald Stanton, some sources cite Charles, drove to Georgia to secretly marry. Parker said that she married him in a bikini with a raincoat on top, adding, "He was very good-looking, and the marriage was just a sheer disaster." The young couple drove back to Florida, where she was still living with her parents, who were upset because of her age and because Ronald was part Cherokee. They moved to Pennsylvania and rented a house near where Dorian was living with her husband and children. Parker was already modeling in the United States and Europe, while Ronald was attending the University of Pennsylvania as a freshman. Parker met journalist Pierre de La Salle, Petou, born July 12, 1925, at a Jacques Fath party outside of Paris. She and Dorian were modeling together and separately on this trip. She returned to the United States and asked Ronald for a divorce, but he would only agree to a quick divorce if Parker gave him a large monetary settlement, paid for plastic surgery on his nose, and paid for his acting lessons. She agreed, and their divorce was finalized in Mexico in 1953. Ronald was killed years later in an automobile accident. Parker and Pierre continued to date for years despite Pierre's numerous infidelities. She also was paying for his high cost of living expenses. They married about 1957 or 1958, but the couple kept it a secret. In 1958, Parker was a passenger in a car her father was driving when they were hit by an oncoming train. Supposedly, neither heard nor saw the train until it slammed into the car. Her father died of his injuries at the hospital. Parker was hospitalized, with broken bones and embedded glass, with her face untouched, under the name Mrs. Pierre de La Salle. The press jumped on this, but Pierre continued to deny that they were married. Soon thereafter, a photo spread. After marrying Dillman in 1963, then receiving injuries in a car accident in 1964, Parker mostly retired from modeling and acting to be a stepmother to Jeffrey and Pamela. Parker enjoyed being a stay-at-home mother, and like her sister Dorian, who was a cordon bleu-level chef, Parker was an excellent cook. Parker had 3 more children with Bradford, daughter Dinah, born 1965, and sons Charlie, born 1967, and Christopher, born 1969. The family lived in Bel Air, Los Angeles, until Dinah was bitten by a rattlesnake in the yard and almost died. They then moved to Montecito in the Santa Barbara area, where Suzy remained until her death in 2003. Later years and death. A self-described tomboy in her teens, she broke several bones as a result. Parker also broke bones in the 1958 car accident that killed her father. In 1964, she was nervously rehearsing for her famous appearance in the well-known Twilight Zone episode, Number 12 Looks Just Like You, when she was in another car accident. Parker had long suffered from allergies and, in the 1990s, developed ulcers. During surgery for an ulcer, her vital signs disappeared on the operating table, but she was resuscitated. She never fully recovered and developed more ulcers and diabetes. She had multiple hip surgeries, and then her kidneys began to fail. She spent the last 5 years of her life in and out of the hospital. Parker decided to end dialysis treatments. She returned home and died at age 70, surrounded by family at her orchard in Montecito on May 3, 2003. She was survived by 2 of her 3 sisters, Dorian, who died in 2008 at age 91, and reportedly did not attend her sister's funeral due to a long estrangement, and Florian, Suzy, who died at the age of 92 on October 9, 2010. Her husband, Bradford Dillman, her 4 children, and 2 stepchildren also survived. She graced magazine covers, was Revlon's most desired model, and then became a movie star, the American success story. Suzy Parker was also the world's first supermodel, who single-handedly defined elegance and became an icon for an entire generation of post-war women who hungered for the sophistication and prosperity that reflected fashion's new look from the late 1940s into the 1960s. Suzy Parker lived a paparazzi-filled life across the world before there was such a concept that a model's beauty could be so widely celebrated. Her innate prettiness reflected a breadth of brilliance, from the international chic of Vogue to the Main Street, USA appeal of Ladies' Home Journal. She posed for ads selling just about everything, from toothpaste to carpet to cosmetics, adding a savoir-faire to each. Parker also became a high-fashion muse to the most prolific photographers of the day, from Paris to Rome and everywhere in between. Coco Chanel chose her as a muse, and Parker would redefine the modeling industry by demanding large sums of money for each sitting. Unheard of then. She became a household name before becoming the biggest model of her era to translate her unique look to film as an actress, starring with heavy hitters such as Gary Cooper, Cary Grant, and Joan Crawford. It was a charmed life that came with a price. Here, we see how this Texan used beauty as her calling card for a life of glamour. More than a pretty face. Such mid-20th century luminaries as Avedon, Penn, and Horst photographed Suzy Parker's elegance, which has rarely been duplicated since. She made their jobs easy because the native Texan redhead was known for her striking green eyes, luxurious hair, and high cheekbones. "I thank God for high cheekbones every time I look into the mirror in the morning," she once commented of her trademark tongue-in-cheek humor. Fashion industry leaders of the era, such as Edie Locke, former editor-in-chief of Mademoiselle, viewed Parker as a one-of-a-kind star when she began to model. "A lot of the models are beautiful, but it takes a lot of makeup and this, that, and the other trick to make them look fabulous," Locke once stated. But all Suzy had to do was shake out that mane and she'd look fabulous. Born in 1932, as a child of the Depression in San Antonio, Texas, to an inventor and his homemaker wife, Cecilia and Renee Parker's road to an extraordinary life started young. Dorian Lee, Parker's eldest sister, was the one who first encouraged her curiosity about the modeling world. Lee had been a magazine cover model superstar since the early 1940s, and in 1947, she introduced her 14-year-old sister to high fashion by taking her to see now legendary modeling agent Eileen Ford. The agent's initial impression was not positive, commenting that, at 5 feet 9 inches, Parker was too tall to be a successful model. Yet Parker moved forward and began modeling during her summer vacations in New York while visiting her sister. But Ford finally came around, asserting, "She was the most beautiful creature you can imagine. She was everybody's everything." Diana Vreeland, fashion editor at Harper's Bazaar for 25 years and then editor-in-chief of Vogue, did not agree with Ford's first reaction and immediately placed her in fashion shoots that would chart the course for a successful career beyond imagination. Parker's ascent to supermodeldom began, though her appeal transcended mere beauty. In the fickle fashion industry, she garnered acclaim as a true fashion chameleon. She could don a simple gingham dress for the cover of McCall's and then slip into a voluminous Charles James couture gown for the cover of Vogue, looking completely appropriate in each. As Parker told Andrew Tobias in his tome on Charles Revson's Revlon beauty empire, Fire and Ice, "Revson thought I should be working for the sheer joy of working for Revlon. I think the reason I was such a good model wasn't that I was such a particular beauty or anything, but that I was as strong as a horse." Yet, after a contract dispute with Revson, the strong-willed model commented, "The next time they wanted me for an ad I said, 'No, thank you.' Then the war was on. Revlon hated me. He absolutely hated me." Regardless, the rest of the world adored Parker and her bewitching beauty, and she continued to pose in several other hundred ads over the course of her career. From high fashion to house paint, Parker was the it girl. After a short while, her national fame shot overseas to the international crowd. She was an international hit. The London Times even called her the epitome of the new American woman. Healthy, assured, and in charge of her life. Because of Parker's flexible brilliance, A fashion editor of the time also observed that Parker was like a girl you might glimpse in between planes at de Gaulle, wearing only a trench coat with a mysterious secret. She was more than just a symbol to women. Parker was the kind of woman that most men-era males wanted to take, in the vernacular of the times, for a moonlit swim. She took Paris with its myriad fashion collections, and the world, by storm. The most beautiful woman in the world, with her sparkling green eyes offset by slouch hats and a slew of Coco Chanel classic numbers, Parker inspired millions of women to aspire to her perfectly proportioned figure. Christian Dior went so far as to name her the most beautiful woman in the world. Yet she was so much more than met the eyes. Suzy Parker gave emotion and reality to the history of fashion photography. Photographer Richard Avedon once explained, "She invented the form, and no one has surpassed her." All it took was one look at an Avedon/Parker collaboration to glimpse her true mystique. Suzy Parker's imagination and ability to perform to Richard Avedon's imagination and direction was brilliant, says veteran photographer Victor Skrebneski. Their photographs will always remain what Parker sought. As she once said about herself, she wanted a life in pursuit of fun, bright lights, and career. In 1952, she became the star in Chanel's stable of mannequins as the designer's signature face. The silver-haired Carmen del Orifice, Carmen as she is still widely known, and after 7 decades of modeling, she likely knew best what working with Parker was really like. She understands how Parker gained fame as an international celebrity, which before her was reserved for only movie stars and royalty. She was a southern beauty to behold, tall, lanky, with a $1 million dimpled cheek smile. She implemented her success by her self-confidence and intelligence, and that unrelentingly scathing wit reflects Del Orifice. Of course, that elusive essence led to her financial success, too. In the 1950s, when successful career women were much less common, and when women regularly earned 30 cents on the dollar of what any man earned in the same position, Parker soon rose to the top of her field as the world's highest-paid model, earning $100,000 a year, accumulated from $200 an hour photo sittings, millions in today's dollars, and posing for over 60 magazine covers and several hundred advertisements. She appeared in everything from A Cover Story in Life in 1957 to the cover of Esquire in 1961, and offered something for everyone. Parker's face was so ubiquitous that she was the first fashion model to reach status as a household name. When she posed in one of fashion's first bikini shots while visiting the French Riviera, it was the shot heard round the fashion world. In the mid-1950s, as she tried to move beyond the constraints of the fashion world, Parker worked behind the camera for a time, apprenticing at the Paris studio of famed art photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, before working as an editor for French Vogue. Because those did not pay nearly what she was accustomed to in front of the camera, she continued to model in Paris, Rome, London, and New York, and even became the inspiration for a film that would change her life. New York to Hollywood. Naturally, Hollywood soon beckoned. In 1957, while at her modeling career's zenith, Parker made her Tinseltown debut in the musical Funny Face, starring Fred Astaire and Audrey Hepburn. The film parroted fashion magazines and French couture, and she performed in a number called Think Pink, which spoofed fashion editors such as her mentor, Diana Vreeland. It is interesting to note that Hepburn's character in Stanley Donen's musical comedy was loosely based on Parker and her professional relationship with Richard Avedon, with Astaire in the Svengali-esque Avedon role. The film symbolizes the best of high fashion in that era, and Hepburn and Parker became pals during the shoot. In fact, Hepburn became such a cheerleader that Parker called the swan-like actress her Hollywood press agent. Perhaps Parker and film were a match made in heaven. Suzy Parker didn't stop talking when I first tried to take her picture. Superstar fashion photographer Horst P. Horst once remarked, "So I said, 'You keep talking,' and I left." When she got into the movies, I joked that maybe she would do for the movies what she would never do for me, to hold still. Parker's first major role was opposite the legendary Cary Grant in Kiss Them for Me, also released in 1957. Jane Mansfield played the female lead, and the film proved an effective tool to display Parker's graceful good looks. "I watched myself on the screen with a sort of frozen horror," Parker said at the time, and I wasn't at all surprised to learn it had a similar effect on the audience. Announcing that she intended to become a good actress, if it kills me, Parker moved on to other redeeming roles that lured audiences of the time. Parker's trademark in photographs and later on the movie screen was icy sophistication, often likened to that of Grace Kelly, wrote New York Times writer Douglas Martin. But in person she exuded a girl, next-door prettiness and a sort of wacky loquaciousness. Her thespian talents were not always favored by critics, but she was considered in New York and Hollywood circles to be entertaining, funny, and possess a meaningful intellect. In 1958, she co-starred with Gary Cooper in 10 North Frederick, in the role of Cooper's much younger girlfriend, and with their torrid May-December affair, she costs him his family. To cap off the decade, she appeared in 1959's The Best of Everything, a costume-laden career girl melodrama, co-starring Hope Lang, Joan Crawford and Robert Evans, in which she played a secretary trying to become an actress. In that film, her character's lines summed up her life at the time. "The only thing I want is to be free, to have no ties, to have to hold and then to let go. Here's to men. Bless their clean-cut faces and dirty little minds." Vintage clip from the hit television series of the time, What's My Line? Parker as a guest in the late 1950s is as charming as herself as any other celebrity guest of the era, proving she was as famous as anyone during that time period. Best wife and mother. Her 1960 film, Circle of Deception, would change her life by introducing her to her co-star and future husband, Bradford Dillman, whom she married 3 years later. Parker later undertook guest spots on popular television shows such as Twilight Zone, Burke's Law, Chrysler Theater, and other popular shows of TV's golden era. She acted through the still camera brilliantly, but when she acted in front of the moving camera she was not so free and comfortable, reveals her stepdaughter, Pamela Dillman Harmon. She said she wasn't the actress she wanted to be, so she decided, "Okay, I'm going to give up on this and devote my talents to being the best wife and mother." And she really was that. Moments from Parker's past, though, are as inexplicable as her beauty. While engaged to actor and model Gardner McKay in 1956, they were returning from Paris on the ocean liner Ile de France, and the ship stopped to pick up survivors of the Andrea Doria, the luxury ocean liner shipwreck that made international news at the time. In a terrible car accident in 1958, she broke both her arms and her father was killed when the car collided with a train in St. Augustine, Florida. It was also revealed that, at 17, she had eloped from high school to marry a childhood sweetheart, Charles Staton. Later, it emerged that Parker had also been secretly married since 1955 to a French journalist and novelist, Pierre Lassalle. However, it did not last and they divorced in 1961. As Parker told one interviewer, "Being married to a Frenchman is interesting. You hardly ever see your husband." Parker also once commented to a reporter that she believed the institution of marriage destroys love. All Suzy really wanted was love and a big family, which she finally achieved, confided Del Orifice. Parker had escaped the jaded outcomes of other stellar models of her era, and the Dillmans moved from Los Angeles to Montecito in 1968 to live a quieter life with their children, and she became an expert cook and gardener. She threw herself into motherhood as much as she did with modeling. Together, they raised 6 children. Parker's daughter Georgia from her marriage to Lassalle, 2 children from Dillman's previous relationship, and the 3 children they had together, Dinah, Charles, and Christopher. Suzy Parker, following a history of ill health and medical problems that included respiratory problems, diabetes, and hip surgery, passed away in May 2003 at the age of 70. But despite her early passing, Parker proved that it's perhaps better to savor youth while at its height than to live it dully until the age of 100. She summed up her life best in a quote she gave to a journalist in the mid-1950s. "I don't tell lies. I merely embellish stories. The truth is so dull." One aspect of her life remains undeniably true. Her life and beauty were anything but dull, and it continues to perpetuate the theory that many of the most beautiful women really are quite complicated. Suzy Parker's net worth is $1 to $5 million before she died. She earned the money being a professional model. She is from TX.